"Please take it slow," the Apache girl moaned. The Cowboy Froze then did the unthinkable. Her voice split through the dust, and to anyone watching, it looked like shame. A girl on her knees, a cowboy behind her, frozen like touching her might damn him. They saw scandal. He saw blood spreading beneath her ribs and a choice that could ruin him or save her. Out here, mercy can look dangerous. So what does a man do when saving her makes him look guilty? The sound of a wagon wheel collapsing echoed through the dry clearing like a gunshot, sending a flock of dust crows screeching into the sky. The girl hit the ground hard beside the broken barrel, breath knocked clean out of her lungs. Her fingers dug into the dirt, clutching it like something alive as pain rippled up her side. The canvas wrap around her waist darkened, slow and spreading, not from modesty, but from a wound just below the ribs. She tried to speak but only managed a strained whimper, the kind that came from someone too proud to scream. Bootsteps crunched through gravel. Calm. Controlled. A single rider dismounted without a word, his shadow falling over her like a curtain closing on a stage. He didn't reach for her right away. Cowboys knew better than to touch a wounded Apache girl in an open field. Even a gesture of help could be mistaken for something else out here, and bullets had been fired for less. Her breath hitched. She tried to push herself upright, but her arm buckled under her weight, and she collapsed against the barrel again, cheek pressed to the sun-warmed wood. "Please," her voice rasped, half broken. "Take it slow." To anyone passing by, the scene carried the wrong meaning. A girl gasping beneath a man's shadow, clothes torn, her body tense beneath his looming frame. But he didn't move closer. He froze like a man standing on sacred ground, afraid to take a step without permission. His eyes flicked to the blood, then to the horizon where tumbleweed rolled silently past like drifting witnesses. He could have walked away. Men had walked away for less. But something in her voice, the way strength and fear tangled inside it, pinned him there like a nail through boot leather. He knelt, but not to touch. He knelt the way a man does before a grave, slowly, respectfully. His hands hovered inches from her, careful, deliberate, not claiming, waiting. No one spoke. Dust rolled through the clearing like breath through a dying fire. Somewhere in that silence, without a word exchanged, a decision was made. The cowboy didn't reach for her right away. The Apache girl's breath came in sharp, shallow pulls, each inhale shivering through her ribs like it hurt to exist inside her own body. She pressed her palm into the dirt, trying to lift herself, but her arm buckled, dust coating her skin like fine ash. She hissed through her teeth and slumped against the broken wagon wheel, sweat shining along her temples. He knelt down, slow as a man approaching a snake coil. His shadow stretched over her like a blanket cast by dusk, but his hands hovered in the air, refusing to touch without invitation. Out here, contact meant claim. Men had been killed for less than putting a hand on an Apache girl. He knew it. She knew it. "You're bleeding," he said quietly. Her reply came through clenched teeth. "Then don't just stand there." He hesitated. The way she said it, half command, half surrender, left no room for pride. She wasn't asking. She was enduring. He reached for the cloth tied around her waist, but stopped just short. "If I pull this, it'll hurt." She let out a breath that sounded like a laugh dying in her throat. "Do it slow." His fingers brushed fabric. Even that slight contact made her tense, like she expected pain from him, not the wound. He moved carefully, loosening the knot while keeping his eyes on her face, instead of the exposed injury beneath. Respect, not fear, held him steady. Behind them, the wind carried faint sounds, voices maybe, or distant hoofbeats swallowed by heat. She heard it too. Her eyes flicked toward the horizon before she masked the motion. "Someone coming?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted past him, toward the trail snaking down from the ridge. Every muscle in her body tightened, not from pain now, but anticipation. He caught it. His hand paused at her waist. "Are you expecting someone?" She closed her eyes just long enough to swallow another wave of pain. "I was supposed to be back before sundown." His jaw clenched. "You're not making it back today." That truth landed between them like a stone. Dust swirled around their boots in a slow spiral, pulled by a wind that had shifted in direction, no longer blowing from the ridge, but toward it. Men rode in on the wind. It always carried their scent before their shapes appeared. She felt it too. Her fingers dug into the dirt. "Untie it," she whispered. "Now." He didn't question her tone. He pulled the cloth free, revealing the wound, deep, angry, still bleeding. She flinched, but didn't look away from the trail. He tore a strip from his own sleeve and pressed it against her side, firm but controlled. Her breath hitched as the pressure hit, but she didn't cry out. She kept her eyes locked on the horizon. He noticed, "What are you seeing?" She didn't blink. "Dust line." He turned his head. At first, he saw nothing, just heat mirages dancing above the sand. Then, slowly, a smear of movement on the trail, like dark ants cresting the ridge. Riders. "Yours?" he asked. "No," she said. He tightened the makeshift bandage around her waist. "Then whose?" Her eyes finally left the horizon and met his. For the first time since he found her, she looked at him not as a man standing behind her, but as the only thing standing between her and what approached. "Not friends," she said. Hoofbeats began to echo, faint but unmistakable. The cowboy rose halfway, hand drifting toward his holster, not grabbing, just acknowledging its presence. He looked down at her, gauging whether she could stand. She tried to push herself up again, teeth gritted against the pain. She managed to lift halfway before her leg buckled, and she nearly collapsed face first into the dust. He caught her, not grabbing hard, just enough to stop the fall. Her shoulder pressed against his arm, heat and tension pulsing between them like a heartbeat. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. The hoofbeats grew louder. They weren't alone anymore. The riders drew closer, their shapes sharpening through the glare. 5 or maybe 6 mounted figures, moving in a loose formation that spoke not of chaos but of purpose. Not drifters, not bandits, men with a task. The cowboy shifted his stance, weight settling into the earth like a stake being driven. He kept one hand near his holster but didn't draw. Drawing too early made you prey, holding steady made you consequence. The Apache girl braced herself against the wagon wheel, breath tight, one hand still pressed against her side where his bandage held. She didn't ask if he would stand. She only watched, testing the space between closeness and trust. The riders slowed as they neared, horses snorting clouds of hot dust. The one in front wore a clean coat that didn't match the grit of travel, too clean, too official. A badge glinted at his chest, dull but visible, like a piece of metal trying to pass for authority in a place that didn't recognize it. His horse stamped once. He looked at the girl, then at the cowboy. "Step away from her," he said. His tone wasn't hostile. It was administrative, like a line spoken by a man used to people stepping aside when asked. The cowboy didn't move. The official's expression tightened slightly. "That woman is under tribal relocation directive. Injured or not, she's to be transported to holding." The girl's jaw locked. She said nothing, but the way her fingers curled into the dirt told the truth. He wasn't here to save her. He was here to process her. The cowboy's voice came calm. "You got papers on that?" The official lifted a folded document from his coat, careful not to let the wind snatch it. "Filed yesterday in Fort Halston. Signed by a federal seat. She's marked for removal and labor assignment. Any interference makes you an accomplice." The cowboy didn't take the paper. He didn't even look at it. His eyes stayed on the official's hand. "Men with real authority don't announce it." The official's jaw flexed. "This isn't a negotiation." He nodded toward 2 of his men. "Secure her gently if she cooperates." The cowboy stepped forward just enough to stand between them and her. "That's close enough," he said. The men hesitated, looking to their leader. The official sighed, the kind of sigh men give before a sermon they've delivered too many times. "Listen, she's not yours to protect. She was logged in town records under hostile movement. These papers," he lifted them again, as if to remind the air, "declare her property of the territorial office. You touch her again and you're touching federal claim." The girl's eyes flicked toward the paper. She stared at it like it was a noose. The cowboy didn't look away from the riders. "Paper burns." The official gave a small, almost amused breath. "That's true, but copies don't." He nodded to his men again. Take her." They urged their horses forward. The girl forced herself onto one knee, body shaking, preparing to stand even if it tore the wound open again. Her breath hitched, but she rose an inch taller. One of the riders reached down, ready to grab her by the arm. The cowboy's hand rested on the butt of his gun. He didn't raise it, didn't aim, he just rested it there. "You lay a hand on her," he said, voice low as a storm warning, "and the next hand you'll need is the one you don't have yet." The riders paused, looking to their leader. The official narrowed his eyes. "You're making a bad decision." The cowboy didn't blink. "Seen worse." The wind shifted again, carrying dust between them like a thin wall. The horses stirred, uneasy. The official gave a small nod, not to the cowboy, to his men, 3 rifles lowered, not in surrender. In preparation, the standoff had begun, and somewhere in the dust behind them, a second dust trail flickered into view on the horizon. Another group, not law, not tribe, something else. The puff of dust on the horizon thickened, pulling into a narrow plume that cut across the sun like a scar. Different gait, different formation. These weren't officers or labor escorts. The first group, the official and his riders, noticed it too. The leader's expression tightened. He lowered the relocation paper slightly. "Unexpected company," he muttered. The cowboy didn't take his eyes off him. "Friends of yours?" The official didn't answer. The Apache girl's breathing grew shallow, but her focus had shifted from pain to calculation. She squinted through the sunlight, watching the dust column with a sharpness that had nothing to do with fear. She knew the land. She knew the way dust behaved based on the kind of men who kicked it up. That trail wasn't wide like a law convoy. It was narrow, fast, hunters. The cowboy saw the recognition in her eyes. "You know that ride." She didn't look at him. Not by name, by speed. The riders behind the official shifted, turning slightly in their saddles. Their formation, tight and confident moments ago, now felt less like authority and more like a circle animal pressed between 2 predators. The official straightened in his stirrups. "Stay sharp," he said to his men. "We solve one issue before another." He pointed at the Apache girl. "Secure her now." The cowboy stepped further between them and her, making himself a wall whether she invited it or not. "I don't recall seeing her ask to be secured," he said. The official's patience began to thin. "This isn't about asking, this is about order." "Order?" The cowboy's tone stayed level. "That what you call tying a wounded girl to a wagon?" The official didn't flinch. "That girl is under relocation directive. She's property of the territorial office." The Apache girl's fingers tensed against the dirt, not from fear, but fury. She spoke quietly, voice steady despite the pain. "I do not belong to paper." The official finally looked at her fully. "You belong to jurisdiction now, and jurisdiction doesn't care what you belonged to before that." His words echoed flatly across the clearing. The distant dust trail grew closer, its edges now sharp enough to count individual riders. 5. No. 4. The formation was too narrow for patrol, too direct for trade. The cowboy narrowed his gaze. "Bounty riders?" The official's jaw clenched. "Unscheduled interference," he muttered. "Perfect." The Apache girl's voice grew tight. "One group comes for chains, the other for coin." The cowboy took one more step forward, placing himself deliberately between both threats. "You boys drew up a fine mess." The official lifted his reins, trying to regain command. "Our authority stands. These bounty men will disperse once they see official seal." The cowboy gave a small, humorless breath. "Seal don't matter to men who hunt for pay." The riders behind the official exchanged glances, unsure now whether they were enforcers or just the first bodies in someone else's fight. A low whistle cut across the wind. Not from the official's men, not from the cowboy. From the approaching group, it wasn't friendly, it was a signal. A rider from the official's side cursed under breath. "They're marking position." The cowboy adjusted his stance. "They're marking prey." The Apache girl closed her eyes for one heartbeat, steadying herself. When she opened them again, she looked not tired, but awake, fully awake. Riders from the first group slowly turned their rifles toward the approaching dust. The approaching riders slowed their advance, not out of caution, out of decision. They were choosing who to kill first. The official raised his paper again, like a man holding a lantern to a stampede. Territorial law. This is a controlled operation, he called. No answer. Not even mockery. Just the steady beat of incoming hooves. The cowboy's hand settled lightly over his holster again, not tense, prepared. The Apache girl pressed her palm harder to her wound and leaned slightly forward, as if preparing to move despite the pain. The two forces, law and bounty, drew closer, and between them, one cowboy and one wounded girl stood like a crack in the land. Dust curled around their boots like the land itself held its breath. The first rider from the bounty group lifted a hand, not to wave, to signal the first strike. The bounty riders slowed to a steady prowl, their horses kicking up dust in long, deliberate strides. They didn't fan wide like the official riders. They came in a tight line meant for taking, not negotiating. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a long coat and a rifle slung lazy across his saddle, scanned the scene with a hunter's calm. His gaze moved from the official's badge to the relocation papers flapping in the wind, then to the Apache girl, still on one knee, and finally to the cowboy standing squarely between her and all of them. He smiled, not with amusement, with certainty. The official raised his paper high like a banner. "This woman is under federal relocation authority. You have no jurisdiction here." The bounty leader didn't stop his horse. "Paper don't matter out here," he said. "Price does." The official gripped the reins. "She belongs to the territorial office." "No," the bounty leader said, barely lifting his eyes from the girl. "She belongs to whoever loads her first." Two of his men moved subtly, shifting their rifles into position, not pointed yet, but angled with intention. Predators testing wind direction. The Apache girl didn't look away from them. A slow breath left her, controlled even through pain. "They don't ride for law," she whispered under her breath. "They ride for silver." The cowboy answered without turning. "Silver spends, law doesn't." The bounty leader finally addressed him directly. "You standing for her?" he asked, tone disturbingly casual. The cowboy didn't blink. "Just standing." The bounty hunter's mouth curved. "Then step aside." Wind dragged a trail of dust across the ground between them like a drawn line. The cowboy didn't move. The bounty leader nodded once to one of his men. "Take the girl." That rider nudged his horse forward, moving with the smooth precision of someone who had done this 100 times. Rope coiled at his saddle. His eyes stayed on her wrists. The official riders shifted in alarm. One of them hissed, "They're going to snatch her from both sides." The bounty hunter didn't bother looking at him. "You officers can write about it after," he said, "if she's still breathing by then." The Apache girl tried to rise again, blood seeping through the cowboy's makeshift bandage. She got halfway before her knee buckled, and the ground tilted beneath her. The bounty rider reached down, rope in hand. And that was when the cowboy moved. He didn't draw. He didn't shout. He just stepped forward and placed his hand on the Apache girl's shoulder, anchoring her upright with a steady pressure that said one thing clearly: she is not unclaimed. The bounty rider paused mid-reach, eyes narrowing. "You touching her makes it your business." The cowboy didn't take his hand away. The bounty leader's smile returned, but thinner now. Then it settled. "You're in it." He gave a signal with 2 fingers. One of his men shifted his rifle. Not at the girl, not at the cowboy, at the official's relocation papers. The official's eyes widened. "Hold!" A shot cracked. The paper tore clean in half, fluttering like a broken flag. No one fell, no blood spilled, just law, ripped open. The official's men jolted in their saddles, rifles half raised in confusion. "They're firing on the order." The bounty leader lowered his smoking rifle with surgical calm. "Now," he said, "she belongs to no paper." 5 riders. 2 forces. 1 wounded girl caught between purchase and possession, and 1 cowboy who had already made his decision. The official's hand shook with anger. "You've just voided a federal claim." The bounty leader's horse pawed the dirt. "Then write a new one." The Apache girl looked up slowly, her breath ragged, eyes moving between the men fighting over her fate, until they landed on the cowboy's hand, still on her, not claiming, just steady. She whispered, barely audible, Why are you standing? The cowboy didn't look at her. Because no one else did, he said. The wind carried those words into the space between rifles. One of them would fire next, and this time it would not be at paper. The silence after the shredded paper settled felt heavier than any gunshot. The wind dragged the torn document across the ground, the seal smeared by dust and ash until it was nothing more than a scrap of meaningless ink. The official's face flushed red beneath the grime. "You've just interfered with federal seizure protocol," he barked. The bounty leader didn't spare him a glance. "You can keep shouting law," he said, eyes fixed on the Apache girl, "but law don't bleed, she does." He nudged his horse forward another step, closing the distance. The bounty rider at his flank spun his rope once more, not as a threat, but as routine. The way a butcher sharpens a blade even after the animal has already been chosen. The Apache girl sucked a breath in through her teeth, steadying herself, but her body wavered. The effort to stay upright was carving pain deep into her side. Blood soaked the cowboy's torn sleeve where it pressed against her waist. He adjusted his stance, bracing her subtly. He wasn't shielding her with theatrics. He was just present, solid in a world of shifting lines. The official raised his rifle finally, desperation beginning to overtake doctrine. "Stand down. The girl is to be transported by official order only. We will—" The bounty leader flicked his eyes toward him once. "You won't do anything," he said simply. "You lost your paper. All you've got now is breath, and shouting doesn't bind a soul." The official's jaw clenched, fingers whitening around his rifle. That was when the cowboy finally spoke again, not loud but cutting clean through the standoff. "She's bleeding out while you men argue over who gets paid to drag her." For a moment, everyone looked at her again, not as target, not as assignment, as a body, a breathing one. The bounty leader's gaze narrowed, reading the cowboy. "You talking mercy? I'm talking survival," the cowboy said. "That ain't your concern," the bounty man replied. The cowboy didn't blink. "I made it mine." Those words landed like a stake in the ground. The Apache girl closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, she looked at the cowboy differently. Not soft, not grateful. Aware. The official, realizing control was slipping from his grasp entirely, lifted his rifle higher. "Final warning! Back away from the girl!" "Warning!" the bounty leader repeated slowly, amused. He glanced at his men. "He thinks we use warnings." Another bounty rider spoke quietly, eyes fixed on the cowboy. "Move aside. Last chance." The cowboy did not move. The rider's jaw flexed. Then, with a single smooth motion, he hurled the rope, not toward her wrists, toward the cowboy's arm. The rope snapped around his forearm, jerking his balance for the first time. The Apache girl gasped as his hand slipped from her side. The bounty rider jerked hard, trying to yank the cowboy away from her like hauling a carcass off a claim. The cowboy didn't lose his footing, but he staggered. The Apache girl, already weakened, nearly collapsed without his support. She caught herself on the wagon wheel with a sharp breath, pain flashing behind her eyes like lightning. The rope tightened. The bounty man braced to drag him down. Then, in a single fluid motion, the cowboy twisted his arm, let the pull come, and stepped into it, using the momentum to whip the rope puller forward. The rider, not expecting resistance, lurched in his saddle. His horse reared, hooves cutting the air. He fought for control but lost it, and hit the ground hard, rifle skidding across the dust. His head didn't crack. His pride did. Dust billowed around him as he rolled, stunned. The bounty leader's eyes narrowed, not in rage, but new calculation. The official's rifle shook in his hands, torn between aiming at the bounty men or the cowboy who had just shifted the balance. The Apache girl pressed her palm to the ground, grounding herself as the world tilted around her. The cowboy stood over the fallen bounty rider, but he didn't draw his gun. He simply planted his boot near the man's dropped rifle and looked up. The message wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "If you want her," his stance said, "you go through me standing, not me dead." And for the first time, both factions realized what that actually meant. The bounty rider on the ground groaned, dust clinging to his coat as he rolled to one knee. His eyes cut up at the cowboy, not with shame but with a dark promise. He wiped blood from his lip, fingers trembling with anger that had nowhere to land. The bounty leader kept his horse still, only his eyes shifting between the fallen man and the cowboy now standing unshaken. He didn't shout, didn't posture. Men like him didn't raise their voice when they could weigh outcomes instead. "You really intend to die over her?" he asked. The cowboy didn't blink. "Depends who tries to make it happen." The bounty leader let out a slow breath. "That answer makes men disappear in places like this." The cowboy's hand lowered, not to draw but to adjust his stance, rooted, not defensive. Behind them, the official struggled to find footing in a moment he no longer controlled. His rifle wavered between the two forces. His men looked at him, not for orders, but for confirmation of whether he still believed in what had just been burned. The Apache girl tried to push herself from the wagon again. Pain lanced through her side, and her leg buckled. She caught herself on the rim of the broken wheel, but this time her breath came out in a sharp cry she couldn't swallow. The sound cut through every conversation like a blade. All eyes snapped to her, not as asset, not as bounty, as a body failing. Her hand slipped. The cowboy moved before anyone else, catching her under the arm again. She hated the weakness, shoulders trembling with the effort not to collapse against him, but he didn't hold her like a savior. He held her like a brace, something a person leans on until they can stand on their own. The bounty leader watched the way the cowboy steadied her, studying it. "This isn't protection," he said slowly. "This is attachment." The cowboy said nothing. "You picked a side," the bounty man continued. "And that means you picked a fate." The official finally snapped, voice cracking. "She is tribal property by federal decree. This territory—" "Property," the cowboy repeated, his tone flat. "You keep saying that word like it makes the ground yours." The official raised his rifle again, but his hand shook so hard the barrel quivered. The Apache girl opened her eyes, unfocused. "Let go," she whispered through her teeth, still proud. "I stand myself." The cowboy didn't release her. "You'll bleed out." Her lips thinned. "Better standing than dragged." Those words landed heavy. The bounty men looked at her, not with pity, but with a flicker of respect. Even the rider, still kneeling in the dust, paused, rope still clutched in his fist. The official didn't hear the meaning. He snapped again. "Collateral or dead, the paperwork still reads the same. She goes on a wagon either way." That sentence killed the last thread of belief his own riders had in him. The older official rider lowered his rifle fully. "Sir, that's not law. That's just cruelty." The official turned on him, outraged. "She is a directive." The older rider shook his head slowly, eyes not leaving the girl leaning against the cowboy. "She's a person who's still breathing." The bounty leader watched the split forming, hand drifting near his saddle rifle. Two forces, neither in agreement. One cowboy, unmoving. One girl, barely holding upright. One canyon, waiting. Her knees buckled again. This time she didn't catch herself. She fell forward, body folding toward the dirt, and the cowboy caught her full weight against his chest. She didn't collapse like something broken. She collapsed like someone who held too long. The bounty leader saw it. The official saw it. They all saw it. Her heartbeat thudded weakly beneath the cowboy's arm. The bounty leader raised his rifle, not to shoot her, to claim her. "Then I'll take her off your hands myself." The barrel leveled, and in that exact second, a rifle cracked from far off. Not aimed to kill, a warning shot that split the dust, just inches from the bounty leader's horse. Every head snapped toward the ridge. The sniper had chosen a moment, and his rifle was no longer aimed at paper. The shot echoed across the canyon walls, sharp and controlled, leaving a thin trail of dust rising at the bounty leader's horse's hooves. The animal reared slightly, snorting in alarm, nearly unseating its rider. The bounty leader pulled hard on the reins, steadying the beast with practiced ease, but his eyes lifted, slow and deliberate, to the ridge. This time, he looked with caution. The sniper remained unseen, but his presence felt like a weight pressing down on everyone in the clearing. The ridge above shimmered under the sun, too bright to see clearly, but the glint of a rifle barrel caught the light for a single, undeniable heartbeat. The message was clear. Whoever held that rifle wasn't warning anymore. He was watching, choosing. The bounty rider on the ground retrieved his rifle slowly, but now his movements were measured. his shoulders tight. He didn't stand as boldly. He scanned the ridge before looking anywhere else. The official raised his voice, trying to claw back control. "Identify yourself," he shouted toward the rocks. "If you interfere with federal action, you will face—" Crack! Another shot, not at a man, not at a horse. At the rifle in the official's hand. The bullet clipped the metal just enough to wrench it sideways, ripping the weapon clean out of his grasp. It skidded across the dirt, sparks flaring as it spun. The official froze, hand suspended where the gun had been. The air turned to glass. No one breathed. Even the fire seemed to still, its crackling embers subdued under the gravity of that shot. The cowboy, still supporting the Apache girl against his chest, looked up at the ridge. His jaw set, not in surprise. In recognition. He knew that kind of precision, that deliberate choice to shoot what mattered to a man rather than the man himself. The bounty leader's eyes narrowed. "You know him?" he asked. The cowboy didn't answer. The Apache girl stirred, breath shallow against his shirt. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it reached him. "Ridge, someone waits." He spoke low, more to her than to anyone else. "He's not waiting. He's judging." The bounty leader scanned the ridge again, tension coiling through him. "That shot wasn't for us," he muttered. The official, shaken more than he wanted to reveal, retrieved his empty hands like he didn't know where to put them. This is obstruction of—" "No," the older official rider interrupted quietly, still mounted, eyes never leaving the ridge. "This is someone deciding who walks out of here." The bounty rider on the ground wiped grit from his mouth, glaring at the cowboy. "You brought a gun up high?" The cowboy shook his head once. He wasn't brought. The bounty leader's gaze flicked between cowboy eye, girly, and ridge, trying to calculate odds. "So he stands for you." The cowboy's eyes remained lifted. He stands for what he sees. The official clenched his fist at his side. "You are all acting outside the—" He didn't finish, because up on the ridge the sniper finally shifted, not to aim, to stand. A tall shape rose in the heat glare, long rifle resting across his shoulder like an extension of his arm. Cloak fluttering in the wind, dust trailing off his coat like smoke. He did not hide. He presented himself. One of the bounty riders whispered it like an omen. "Ridge ghost," another replied under breath. "Not a ghost. Worse." A witness. For the first time since arriving, the bounty leader's fingers tapped against his saddle horn, not fear, but respect. "Man aiming to kill ain't patient like that," he muttered. "He's waiting on something." The cowboy nodded once, waiting to see who draws first. The Apache girl pressed her fingers weakly into the cowboy's coat, her voice cracking. Then no one draw. He looked down at her, steady, unreadable. Firelight flickered across her face, sweat and blood mixing on her skin like war paint, painted not by ritual, but by endurance. Above them, the ridge figure remained still, watching. Not to strike, to witness what choice was made next. The Apache girl's breath began to stutter now, each inhale a sharp ripple beneath the blood-soaked bandage. She was fading. Not in spirit. Her gaze was still fierce, but in body. Her skin had taken on that grey tint dust gets when it's too dry to hold life. The cowboy felt her weight sag a little heavier against him. He spoke without looking away from the ridge. "She needs fire to cauterize, or she won't see sundown." The bounty leader frowned. "We didn't ride here to babysit a dying girl." The official snapped, seizing the moment, which is exactly why she must be transported to holding. "Medical attention will be—" The girl let out a short, harsh breath. "Holding doesn't heal. Holding waits." Her voice cut through his argument like a blade through paper. Silence answered her. Even the official didn't push back immediately. The cowboy adjusted his stance and began guiding her toward the wagon's shadow, not asking permission from either force present. He did it like a man moving between storms, careful but unstoppable. The bounty leader's horse stepped into his path, blocking him. "Don't walk off, friend, we haven't finished claiming." The cowboy didn't stop. He moved around the horse like water around stone. The horse shifted to cut him off again. This time the cowboy stopped, not because he was threatened, because he had decided something. He turned his head slightly, speaking cold and clear, not loud, but made of something unshakable. She bleeds again. She dies. One of you wants to chain her. One of you wants to sell her. Fine, fight over it. He shifted his gaze across both factions. But I'll keep her breathing while you do it. That hit different. It wasn't a threat. It was a dismissal, a refusal to play their game. The bounty leader narrowed his eyes. He wasn't used to being ignored. You planning to walk her to safety between two loaded guns? Yes, the cowboy said simply. The official scoffed. You won't make 5 steps. The cowboy looked at him. Then count them. And he took the first step. A ripple went through the men like wind through dry grass. Hands tightened on rifle grips. Horses stomped nervously. Not a single trigger was pulled. But every eye tracked that step like witnessing a line being crossed in real time. The Apache girl's hand closed around his coat, not in fear, but in effort to stay anchored to something real. Second step. The bounty rider who had been knocked down earlier stood shakily, bruised but burning with wounded pride. He lifted his rifle, jaw clenched. You move again, you drop. The cowboy didn't look at him. Then pull. The rider hesitated, finger hovering on the trigger. Not fear, confusion. What do you shoot at when a man won't play the part of enemy? The cowboy took the third step. The Apache girl swayed. He held her steady with one arm, guiding her like something sacred through a field of men who only understood profit and protocol. Her voice came low, barely a thread. They will shoot. He spoke under his breath, eyes still forward. Then fall toward me, not away. She didn't answer. She just held on. Fourth step. The official finally snapped. Panic overriding doctrine. Stop him. Seize them both. His voice trembled. Because even he felt it. The canyon, fire, and sky felt like they were listening now. Like every force here was being tested for what it truly served. One of his riders lifted a rifle. The same moment one of the bounty men did. 2 guns aimed, not at the cowboy, at each other. The bounty rider snarled, You don't get to process what we're paid to take. The official rider raised his rifle higher. Touch her again and you'll face territorial charge. 2 men, 2 rifles. Each pointing at the other instead of the target they came for, because the cowboy had walked past their script, and now they were fighting for pages that no longer mattered. The cowboy took the 5th step, and in that precise moment, the Apache girl's knees gave out again. Her body started to drop. The cowboy caught her, and instead of setting her behind cover, he lifted her into his arms, not to carry her away, to carry her through. Every rifle in the clearing flinched upward at once. The ridge sniper's hand finally tightened fully on the trigger. Someone was about to fire, for real this time. The cowboy didn't look at the rifles. His focus stayed low, on the girl in his arms. Her head rested against his shoulder now, hair matted with dust and sweat, each breath sounding like it had to claw its way out from somewhere deep inside her. Her hand clutched weakly at his coat, not gripping, just staying, like an anchor keeping her from drifting into darkness. The bounty rider he had thrown earlier took a step forward, rope still in his fist. Pride burned behind his eyes like a coal. Put her down, he warned. The cowboy didn't answer. He shifted his grip so her body rested more securely against his chest. He moved like someone carrying something breakable, not because she was fragile, but because he refused to be the thing that broke her. The bounty leader leaned forward in his saddle. You get one more step, he said, just one. The cowboy adjusted his footing on the dirt, then watched closely. The Apache girl tried to speak. Her lips parted, but only a breath came out, dry and fractured. He bent his head slightly so she wouldn't have to raise her voice. Save your strength, he murmured. She swallowed, blood trailing from the corner of her mouth. Her voice was only air, but it shaped a single word. Taike. He didn't answer her. 6th step. The bounty rider's rifle snapped up. The official rider's did too. The 2 barrels crossed each other's line of fire, shaking slightly with indecision, each side waiting for an excuse to claim that the other drew first blood. Men who had come to capture now found themselves in a standoff, not against their enemy, but against their own reflection. The bounty leader leaned forward more. There's no saving her, he said flatly. Only collecting or burying. The cowboy lifted his gaze at him. For the first time, there was something cold behind his eyes. "Then I'll choose which," he said. The bounty leader's fingers curled around his rifle grip. "You don't get that choice." The cowboy held his stare. "I just took it." The Apache girl's eyes fluttered halfway open again. She looked out over the clearing, not at the men, but at the dust rising behind them, at the broken wheel, at the strip of sky above the canyon that still held firelight. She whispered something in her own tongue, too soft for most ears to catch. The sniper heard it. From the ridge, he shifted his stance by a fraction, rifle following the cowboy, not to threaten, but like a silent vow to whoever now stood in front of all guns. The official, seeing all control slipping away, finally screamed, "Fire!" The command tore the air. "Fire!" Rifles cracked in a dozen tight pops, spitting smoke that smelled like iron and wet earth. The first shots weren't aimed at the cowboy or the girl. They were aimed at each other by reflex, at the nearest threat in sight, at men who had stopped being men and become moving targets. A bullet blew through the air and struck the dirt inches from the cowboy's boot, throwing grit into his face. He didn't flinch. The Apache girl screamed once, a raw, startled sound that cut through the volley. The bounty leader's horse gave a vicious snort and kicked, hooves digging at stone. It bolted, dragging its rider in a tangle of reins and curse. The man who'd been thrown earlier rolled out of the dust and lunged for his rifle. His hands found grip, but his aim was wild. A second shot cracked from the ridge, a clean, surgical sound. It hit the ground near the official's horse, and the animal bucked away, sending the official sprawling into the dust. His rifle skittered and came to rest against a rock, useless as a promise. Smoke hugged the canyon. Shouts and curses flew like broken arrows. The bounty rider who had tried to rope the cowboy scrambled back to his feet, anger turning to panic as men and horses collided in a chaotic tangle. The cowboy tightened his arms around the Apache girl, moving his body instinctively to shield her from flying debris. He didn't raise his gun, he didn't shout. He simply hunched and pulled her closer, positioning himself between her and the worst of the flaring chaos. "Move!" someone screamed. No authority, only fear. A horse reared close enough that the girl's hair brushed its flank. She flinched, clawed tighter to the cowboy, eyes rolling at the edges. Blood slicked her lip where she'd bitten down hard. She tasted iron. The bounty leader righted himself, face twisted with fury. He staggered to his feet and lifted his rifle. He wanted a target. He wanted control. He fired at the cowboy's shoulder. The shot found the cowboy's coat, ripping fabric with a hot metallic whisper. The cowboy grunted, jaw clenching, and his body bowed. He didn't let go of the girl. He only folded like a hinge, bringing them both down to one knee so the girl wouldn't fall. "Sam!" Someone's voice broke out. Someone who knew him. It was lost in the noise. The cowboy's hand tightened on the girl's back. He tasted dust and blood and a sharp heat where the bullet had nicked him. He kept his breath even, not letting panic reach his lungs. The bounty leader barked orders now, voice ragged. "Grab them, now!" Two riders surged forward. One collided with a horse's flank and came down hard, limbs tangled. Another man swung in close, hand outstretched to grab the girl's arm. The cowboy moved with him like a shield. He shoved the man cleanly with his free hand, knocking him off balance. The man fell backward, hitting the ground with a dull thud. From the ridge, the sniper's shadow shifted again. He fired once more, not at faces, but at the ground to the side of a cluster of horses. A stallion whinnied and bolted, dragging two men into a spinning tumble of leather and panic. Riders slammed into the dirt, reins tangled, steel banged against stone. The official, coughing, scrambled up and tried to regain some sliver of command. "Hold! Hold your fire!" he screamed, voice breaking with a panic that no paper could fix now. A kid of a rider, trembling, tried to steady himself and raised his rifle toward the bounty leader. He aimed with hands that shook so bad his aim was a joke. Someone shouted for him to lower it. He lowered it. The Apache girl's hand went slack. The cowboy's shoulder sagged under her weight. Blood spread dark across his shirt where the bullet had grazed him. He pressed a band of cloth, his own sleeve, hard into the wound, not to stop the bleeding so much as not to let it show. "Will you live?" she rasped, mouth dry, voice fragile like bone. He blinked at her, brief, like a small apology. "For now," he said. Keep breathing. He wrapped his arm more securely around her. He moved as if counting seconds in steps. 1, 2, 3. Each beat an effort to keep them both upright. Around them, the canyon had dissolved into noise, men shouting names they'd never say in peace, boots sliding on loose stone, the metallic stink of spent rounds. The bounty leader reached them at last, reining his mount in with a swipe that sent grit into the air. He dismounted half crazy with a fevered desire to seize and be done with this living tangle of blood and laws. "You make this worse," he spat, leaning over them. "You make this our blood." The cowboy's eyes met his. Not hate, not pleading. Quiet, steady refusal. "Then take your coin and leave." The rider's fingers curled. He lunged, grabbing at the girl's wrist. A rifle cracked again. Close, too close. The man's hand slipped. He staggered back, clutching his shoulder, eyes wide. He'd been grazed by a piece of metal, maybe a bullet fragment. The bounty leader cursed, furious now in a way that wasn't strategic. He spun toward the ridge. The sniper watched it all like a judge reading testimony. He didn't smile. He simply watched men decide to be lesser or greater by the choices they made under the sun. "Get out!" snapped a voice close by, the older rider, who'd been wavering. He pushed another bounty man off his horse and toward the retreat. "You who sell bodies, go!" The bounty leader took a step back, fury and calculation warring across his face. He looked at the men still with him, the ones who'd come for coin and not grief. Their resolve faltered. Horses snorted and shifted. The officials' men were already half-turned toward a path that led out of the canyon. The canyon's soundscape changed. Less a battle now, more a sorting. Men who wanted cash trotted away with their pride and empty hands. Men who wanted order stayed, faces set in a way that admitted they no longer knew what they enforced. The bounty leader backed up, then sat his horse and rode off, spurs clinking like a bitter hymn. His men followed, some with curses, some with a look that said this day had cost more than the coin it would bring. But not all left. One younger bounty rider stayed, collapsing to his knees a short distance away, stomach heaving. The official's old rider stayed also, dismounting slowly, hat removed, hand trembling. The cowboy stayed on his knees, pressed to the girl, one hand against his wound. The pain was a white flare, but it was a ledger that didn't matter now. His focus was on her chest rising and falling, the small sips of air she managed to steal between blood and dust. Above, on the ridge, the sniper lowered his rifle gradually. He didn't ride away, he didn't move from rock. He watched until the canyon had spit out the last of those who rode for money. Then, without a sound, he turned his head and vanished into the stone like a shadow folding on itself. Silence slid back over the clearing slowly, like a weight settling after judgment. Men gathered their fallen, horses calmed. A few curses lingered, but the immediate threat had thinned to rattling nerves and shifting loyalties. The cowboy flinched as someone, one of the official's riders, moved forward tentatively, handing over a strip of cloth and a canteen. "Patch him," the man said simply, voice rough. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't want any. The cowboy took the cloth with one hand, gripped the canteen with the other, and did what needed doing. He tied, pressed, breathed, whispered simple words of instruction and steadiness to the Apache girl, while the canyon around them exhaled. A new sort of quiet filled the hollow, one that wasn't peace, but the close of something that had been torn open. And still, the question hung in the dust. What would be left of their names when towns told the story? The clearing had stopped roaring with gunfire, but the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that came after a wound, not healed, just not bleeding for a moment. Dust still hung in the air, slow and golden, floating around the Apache girl's face, as the cowboy poured a little water from the canteen against her parched lips. She swallowed like each drop had to fight to stay inside her body. Her eyes opened halfway, lashes clumped with sweat and grit. She looked at him, not with thanks, with clarity. "You carry me like I'm not a burden," she rasped. The cowboy didn't respond. He tied the last strip of cloth around his shoulder wound with his teeth and one hand, movements quick and practical. "You're breathing," he said. "That's worth carrying." Those words weren't soft. They were steady. The two riders who remained, The older official rider and the young bounty man who had fallen to his knees watched in uneasy stillness. They didn't step closer, but they no longer held their rifles against him either. Everything in the canyon felt rearranged. The official, his coat torn, badge bent, pride cracked, stooped to pick up what was left of his relocation order. The paper flaked apart in his fingers, more ash than page. Useless. He stared at it, disbelief dragging across his features like frost. All this over a girl who won't even live till dusk. The cowboy's eyes lifted, calm but cold. Then let dusk take her. Not you. The official looked at him, mouth working to form something harsh. Law, ownership, duty. But none of those words fit in his mouth anymore. Not here. Not after paper had burned and blood had spoken louder. He lowered his head. What do you plan to do? The cowboy didn't stand. He adjusted the Apache girl more securely in his arms, shifting her so her breathing came easier. Find fire, he said. Stop the bleeding. The young bounty rider finally spoke, voice cracking. You'll make a target of yourself. Both of you. The cowboy didn't look at him. Already am. The Apache girl stirred, voice hoarse but cutting. You could leave me. Silence spread slowly, like oil on water. He didn't answer with words. He stood. Her body lifted with him, weight against his chest. She flinched from the movement but did not protest again. The official watched, eyes narrowed, not with anger now, but with a kind of bone-deep confusion. Why? He muttered. She's not your people. The cowboy met his gaze. Neither are you. Still held fire for you. The older rider flinched at that, remembering the sniper's shot that saved him from the bounty man's bullet. He looked at the ridge, searching for the figure who had vanished. He spoke low, more to himself than anyone else. Some men, they watch to see if we'll make the right choice. Not the lawful one, the right one. The Apache girl's head rested against the cowboy's shoulder, her voice barely there. She spoke in her own tongue first, a whisper like prayer or curse. Then, in English, rough and quiet, you stand with no tribe. The cowboy started walking. His boots sank an inch into the dust with each step, carrying her away from the place where law, profit, and blood had collided. The canyon walls loomed on either side, waiting to see if he could carry her out before night. Behind him, the remaining riders didn't give chase. The official lowered his destroyed badge into the dust. The young bounty man watched them go and did something no one expected. He bowed his head, just slightly, like acknowledging a burial. As the cowboy walked, the Apache girl's fingers tightened weakly into his coat. Her voice slipped out again, soft as a heartbeat fading. If I die, she murmured, don't let them write me. The cowboy's steps never slowed. They won't, he said. It wasn't a promise. It was a vow. The sun had dipped low enough that the canyon shadows stretched long, pooling like dark water through the dust. The cowboy found a strip of dry brush near a half-buried wagon axle and lowered the Apache girl gently beside it. She landed on one elbow, jaw tightening against the pain. But she didn't cry out. She looked at the scrub and wood like someone weighing whether fire would hurt more than bleeding. He set her down carefully, his coat still wrapped around her to slow the chill that comes after blood loss. He knelt and began striking flint, each spark a brief heartbeat of light in the settling dusk. The Apache girl watched him, eyelids heavy. You light fire, she said quietly, and you bring eyes. He didn't stop striking. Fire's better than death. She gave a small breath that might have been pain, might have been the start of a laugh. Sometimes they're the same. The spark caught, flickering over a twist of dried brush. Flame licked upward, a small curl of orange cutting through gathering night. The cowboy leaned in, feeding it slow, coaxing it like something fragile. His movements held the same measured patience he had used when lifting her, steady, deliberate, gentle even in the face of harsh necessity. The heat reflected in her eyes, glassy now. You're going to burn me, she murmured. He met her gaze. I'm going to keep you. The fire crackled softly, wood popping like knuckles. The cowboy tore another strip from his coat and held it over the flame, watching the cloth darken and smoke. He tested the heat with his palm, feeling the precise moment when hot became searing. The girl's breathing hitched. Do it fast." He shook his head slightly. "No, slow." Her eyes widened, not in fear, in understanding. He shifted, kneeling beside her. His hand came to rest lightly against her side, not restraining her, but anchoring her. "Bite this," he said, offering the last clean fold of his sleeve. She stared at it a second before taking it between her teeth, jaw set against what was coming. The cowboy held the heated cloth an inch above her wound. The firelight painted his face in flickering bands, shadow over cheekbone, glow in the eyes, a look not of violence but of someone willing to be hated for a pain that might save. "Ready," he said, though they both knew no one ever was. Her fingers dug into the dirt, blood slicked down her side in a steady line. The heated cloth hovered. Then a rock fell somewhere behind them, a soft, deliberate sound, not a stumble, a step. The cowboy's head turned slow. He didn't drop the cloth. He didn't reach for his gun. His eyes lifted beyond the firelight into the deepening dark of the canyon mouth. A silhouette stood just outside the reach of flame, not the bounty riders, not the officials' men, someone else. The Apache girl sensed it too. Her eyes moved to the dark shape, sweat shining along her brow. She spat the cloth from her mouth, chest rising in shallow waves. "More hunters," she whispered. The cowboy didn't answer. The figure stepped forward, just enough that the firelight touched the lower part of his coat. Dust-caked, travel-worn, not marked by badge or coin. His voice came quiet, shaped like rock worn smooth by river water. "I didn't come to take," he said. The cowboy didn't lower the burning cloth. "Then speak your piece and stay clear." The figure's eyes moved to the wound, to the girl's ragged breathing, to the fire that waited to be pressed to flesh. "You do it wrong," he said, "and she won't wake again." The girl's gaze sharpened through pain. "You think you know my body." He stepped closer, not enough to threaten, but enough that the fire warmed the edge of his coat. "I've seen men die from a wound half that depth because some fool closed it while the vein was still open." The cowboy's jaw flexed. "You offering advice?" The figure knelt opposite him, hands open where the cowboy could see them. He didn't reach for anything. He simply pointed once, steady and unshaking, at a point just above the girl's rib. "Press there first," he said, "or the fire will make the bleeding worse." The Apache girl studied him through half-lidded eyes. Her voice came low, worn. "Who are you?" In the firelight, his face became clear. Not the sniper, not an officer, not a bounty man, just a traveler, maybe a scout, maybe someone who had carried too many bodies off the field to mistake ritual for healing. He looked at the cowboy. "You carry her," he said, "so you finish it." He didn't reach for the cloth. He reached for her hand, not to guide it, to place it over his, 2 hands, 1 wound, fire ready. The cowboy looked at him long and without trust. The Apache girl squeezed the stranger's fingers weakly, not as thanks, as permission. The fire hissed. The cloth smoked. The cowboy lowered it, and just as it touched flesh, a new sound tore through the canyon. A whistle, not of wind, of incoming riders. The cowboy pressed the searing cloth down. The Apache girl arched in pain, a muffled cry caught between her teeth as the burning fabric met flesh. Smoke curled upward, smelling of scorched cloth and blood. Her body trembled under his hold, every muscle screaming to pull away, but his hand held her steady, not forcing, anchoring. The stranger opposite her kept her wrist braced in his palm, applying pressure in the exact place he'd pointed to before. His grip wasn't gentle, it was precise. The kind only someone who'd seen too many people die without that pressure could have. The fire bit deep. Her breath hitched once. Twice. "Stay," the cowboy said. She didn't answer, but her hand tightened around the stranger's fingers until her knuckles whitened. Tears didn't fall. They gathered in her eyes like something that refused to break. Then, that whistle split the air again, sharp, commanded, not distant this time, close. The cowboy didn't lift the cloth. Another rider's voice cut through the canyon, rough and eager. "There, by the fire." Horses thundered against stone. More than 3. Less than 10. Hooves hit the ground with the cadence of those who rode without hesitation, not bounty riders, not law. The stranger's eyes flicked up. "You have one more breath to finish." The cowboy didn't look up. He held the cloth down, heat burning his own palm, refusing to pull back until the wound sealed. The Apache girl shuddered, a sound escaping her that was more snarl than cry, her pride bleeding as much as her body. "Hold," the cowboy said, not sure if he spoke to her, to the stranger, or to himself. The wound sizzled. Then, under his hand, the bleeding stopped. He lifted the cloth away just enough to see blackened skin, sealed by fire. Her breathing came shallow but steady. Done. He moved to lift her. The stranger leaned back, releasing her wrist. "Cover it. Quickly!" Before the cowboy could respond, a voice bellowed from the dark. "Hands off the girl and step away!" The cowboy rose halfway, shifting the girl against him. His body angled instinctively between her and the incoming riders. The stranger stood too, slow, movements measured like a man carefully testing the weight of a loaded moment. Riders emerged from the canyon mouth, faces half shrouded in dust scarves. Clothes marked not by badge or bounty, but with black sashes tied tight around their arms. The Apache girl's breath caught. Recognition. Fear. Not of death, but of something worse. Her voice was faint, but the words she spoke cut deeper than any command. Raiders. Not mercenaries, not officials. Scalp takers. They didn't ride for law or coin. They rode for fun. The lead raider's horse stopped at the edge of the firelight. His eyes prowled over the scene and landed on the girl in the cowboy's arms. A grin split through the dust on his face. "Well now, thought we'd be chasing scraps. But look here, already gift-wrapped." The stranger stepped forward once. One pace, nothing more. It was enough to draw a laugh from the riders. The leader tilted his head. "You step again. I cut you first." The cowboy didn't move. He didn't lower the girl. His coat still wrapped her like a shield. The raider leader's eyes flicked to the sealed wound, then to the cowboy's burned hand, then to the stranger's still-tucked stance. Recognition sparked in him. "Someone helped you," he said slowly. "But don't matter. She's ours now." The cowboy shifted his grip, subtle, almost unnoticed. Not to draw, to lift. The raider's eyes narrowed. "You carry her like she's worth something." The cowboy's voice came low and even. "She is." The raider laughed. "Then die with her." He raised his hand to signal the charge, and before he could drop it, a shot cracked from the ridge, not into the raider leader, into the arm he raised. Bone snapped. He screamed, clutching his ruined wrist. Firelight flashed on the ridge again. The sniper had returned. This time he wasn't warning, he was choosing. The raiders halted, eyes snapping upward. Silence. Then, through the echo of the shot, the sniper's voice rolled down the rock. "The next shot isn't for arms." The cowboy didn't look up. He held the Apache girl tighter. The raiders had to decide if they believed him. The raider leader sat slumped in his saddle, clutching his shattered wrist, eyes blazing with rage he could no longer act on. His horse danced nervously beneath him, sensing a predator it could not see, a rifle higher than law and faster than hate. The other raiders shifted, rifles half raised but not aimed. Their eyes darted between the cowboy of the girl in his arms, the stranger by the fire, and the silent ridge. They didn't see the sniper. They didn't need to. They felt him. One of the younger raiders broke first. He yanked his horse back with a rough jerk and spat in the dust. "Leave it," he muttered. "Ain't worth dying over one half-dead girl." The leader's teeth clenched. "She's Apache." That scalp. Another shot rang out. This one didn't hit flesh. It hit the ground just in front of the raider leader's horse, a spray of dirt kicking up like a warning from the earth itself. The horse reared. The raider leader nearly toppled. His men pulled their mounts back, the fear in them raw and feral. They didn't argue again. One by one, they turned their horses, not in formation, not with pride. They withdrew like men leaving holy ground. They had defiled with their eyes. The last of their hooves faded into the canyon darkness. Only then did the cowboy move. He knelt beside the fire again, lowering the Apache girl gently against the warmed earth. Her breath fluttered in her chest, shallow but present. The stranger tore a clean cloth from his belt and handed it over without a word. The cowboy wrapped it carefully around the cauterized wound, securing it tight. The older official rider approached, hat held at his chest, eyes downcast. "There's a water creek west," he said quietly. "Runs cold, enough shade to hide till morning." The cowboy didn't speak. The rider continued. "No one will follow tonight, not with him still watching." His eyes flicked upward toward the ridge. He did not speak the sniper's name, not out of fear, out of respect. The cowboy nodded once. The young bounty rider who had stayed behind stepped forward slowly. He didn't look at the girl. He looked at the cowboy's burned hand. "You'll scar," he muttered. The cowboy glanced at his own palm. The flesh was seared, skin blistered and darkened from the fire he had pressed against her. "Good," he said. "Why?" the boy asked. The cowboy stood, lifting her again. Her head rested against his shoulder, dark hair falling like a curtain over the blood on his coat. "So I remember," he said. The bounty rider opened his mouth, then shut it again. There was nothing left to argue. The stranger who had guided the cauterization knelt once more by the fire, shoveling dirt over it to douse the flame. He moved like a man accustomed to ending things quietly. The cowboy paused, watching him. "You ride alone." The stranger didn't look up. "I ride with whoever's still breathing." The fire hissed beneath the dirt. A thin trail of smoke curled into the air before fading into night. The Apache girl stirred faintly, whispering something in her language, a word too soft to carry, but it made the stranger lift his head. "You live?" he said to her, voice steady. "That's enough." Her eyes opened, finding his face in the dim. "For now," she breathed. The cowboy adjusted his hold on her, his silhouette cut against the dying light like a figure carved in iron. He looked out across the canyon one last time, where ash still floated in lazy spirals from the earlier firefight. The ridge stood silent. The sniper was gone, or perhaps waiting somewhere beyond sight, as witnesses often do. The cowboy turned. The stranger fell into step beside him. Behind them, the older rider watched them leave and removed his badge, setting it gently on a stone like a marker at a grave. The young bounty rider bowed his head once more, then followed the river path alone, unarmed. The cowboy carried her forward, boots leaving a long trail in the dust. They didn't look like heroes. They looked like people who chose to stay when it would have been easier to walk away. And that, in this land, was rarer than any victory. Some men ride to claim, some ride to sell, and a few, just a few, ride to carry. If you want more stories of dust, fire, and the kind of mercy that looks like defiance, stay with us, because out here the next story's already watching.